I want to welcome you to the Best Places to Lead show. I am your host, Jerry McNamara, and I'm grateful if you're here or if you're joining us on a podcast that you decided to press play. So we're on a mission, and I'm glad that you're here today because we're going to impact 5 million people over the next 5 years through better business. And so as we close out 2022, year one of this journey and mission, it has been super fun and reflective. And I am going to do a solo show before we close out the year and talk about all the lessons that I've learned. So I hope you join me for that in 2 years. Here's the point. Here's why we do this show, because I have never met someone who shows up to work and says, you know what, I really want to suck today. And yet there's so many people that are ineffective in their work, but it's not their fault. It's us as the leaders. It's our fault. We have to create the path for them to be great. And so it's why I'm working with leaders to create compelling companies that outperform. And here's the trick. You still need to make it home for dinner because success without fulfillment is the greatest ripoff in life. So if we can build companies that are so compelling, so fun, so engaging, that our employees are shocked that they still get a paycheck because they're having so much fun and would do it for free, that's when we know we're winning. And so when you're good at home, you can be great at work. And when you're good at work, you can be great at home. And so that's really what I'm after. How do we get to a world where our work doesn't impede us from being a great husband or a wife or a mom or a dad or a brother or sister or a friend? And ultimately, we want to have more smiles in the world. So that's what we're after. And so that's why we do this show, so that we can be better together. And so today, super fun, we have Kyle Gillette. And for those of you who know me, I am a sucker for a great framework because frameworks create repeatable, scalable, predictable results. There's things in the framework that you can point to. And, you know, if you've been around before, I've shared my leadership frameworks. I think Kyle has an interesting one. And I think, you know, for all of us, it's about exposing yourself to as many frameworks as possible so that you can contextualize your leadership style that is most effective for you. So Kyle, thank you for joining us and congratulations on your new book.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you, I guess you could say. It's great to be here.
That's right. Now, Kyle, we keep it pretty simple and loose here. And so if people have questions, just go ahead and put it in the chat. But really, the goal is making sure that all of these people leave here with either something that made them go, that was really interesting, that changed my thinking, or some action point that they can go and put into the world. And so that's my challenge to you, to make sure that we leave people with either something that's going to change their perspective or something that they're going to go implement. Kyle, let's get into it. As I was researching for the show, you say that all great leaders have a sage mindset. And, you know, that's the concept of your book. Give me a brief overview of the SAGE leadership model.
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about SAGE like a leadership house, where self-awareness is the foundation to your leadership, the stronger your self-awareness or the higher your self-awareness, the stronger that foundation will be. The A is accountability, and that's the nails that hold your leadership house together. Without accountability, your leadership is going to crumble on itself and obviously going to hurt other people in the process. Growth is the walls and the roof of your leadership. So as you maintain a growth mindset, you're going to be able to have the walls and roof of your leadership house be remodeled, adjusted, shifted, however they need to be. And then empowerment is the windows and doors. And that represents where people see into your leadership and they go, wow, Kyle is doing something amazing. Jerry is doing something amazing. And they want to participate in that leadership in some way, shape, or form. It could be as an employee, it could be as a customer, or it could be as a partner in it, but they notice. And so they knock on that door and they come in, and then you empower them, they empower you. But that's in a nutshell what SAGE is, in a visual or in a picture for people to consider.
I love it. You know, I've had this conversation a number of times, Kyle, and you're saying it with the E piece of it, right? Which is, are you a leader worth following? And I think there's a lot of times where we don't really think about the work that we're doing and whether we are actually someone where people would say, you know what? Kyle's has that attractive mentality and let's come along for the journey with him. And so I think that's part of what we need to make sure that we're thinking about as leaders. Are we someone worth following? Let me ask you this. How did you develop your framework? How did you get to the SAGE idea? Was it something like you were just walking the dog one day, or was it something where you were like, all of these series of experiences led me to this? Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, when I was a senior in college, I was not doing well in school and I was not doing well personally. I was about 40 pounds overweight and I was a mess. I really didn't like myself very much.
Mm,
And I was behind in school. I hadn't done all the classes I was supposed to because I'd not paid attention very well for some reason. And so my life was what I like to call a dumpster fire at that time. And I was scared to death to start life because senior year, this is the first time I'd be really truly on my own because I was, grew up in my parents' house and then went straight to college. I didn't have to really do the adulting thing yet. And so I was terrified. And that came with not paying attention well enough in school, gaining the weight, and just not happy with myself. But what worked out great was I had gone on a trip to India and met a guy named John that was from the same area that I was from, going to the same school area. And after we returned, he called me up and said, "Hey, John," or "Hey, Kyle, there's this mentoring program that I think you'd be a great fit for." And I said, "Okay, tell me about it." Well, the long story short of it is it's a mentoring program that helps guys that are 18 to 25 get their lives back on track. And my job was to go into the program and live with these guys and help them get life skills, help them get their lives on track. Well, I'm over here with my life a complete utter mess, and I'm being asked to help these guys get their lives on track. And I said, "Sure, I'll interview." I was just glad there was someone that wanted me. So I went into the interview, and it was on this 20-acre ranch, rolling green hills, beautiful farmland, beautiful, perfect, idyllic setting. Walked into the house and I started the interview and I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was being held down in a good way, not drowning, but being held down like I belonged there. And after an hour and a half of interviewing, the director and the president said, "Hey, do you want the job?" And what that meant was I was going to move out of my apartment and move into this place with some guys that had very rough histories and live with them and try to help them out. So I said yes. And then for 9 years, I worked and lived there in various capacities. And I was mentored the whole time. So I took that mentorship experience and the mentoring that I did and the coaching that I did and the coaching I received. And it eventually became what is now Sage. It didn't, by no means did that name come to mind at all those 20 years ago or whenever it was. But that's how it ultimately came about, was through some really powerful mentoring. The guy that mentored me he had run 30 businesses and retired at like 51 years old as a multimillionaire and was highly successful. And I got to be mentored by him. It was fantastic.
awesome. I love that. Let's start with self-awareness, because I think this is super important. I keep on telling my kids, I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, that awareness always precedes action. In fact, I've said it so many times that even my 6-year-old now rolls his eyes at me. How do you help conveniently oblivious people to develop that self-awareness so that they can lead well?
Yeah, there's two things. I mean, I have 5 mindsets and 5 habits in the book that I talk about, but I'll share two of the habits. And one of them is to write, to journal. So for Dawn, this is probably not a big deal. It sounds like you love to write, so this is probably no big deal to you. But for those of us that don't write, I highly recommend to journal. And it doesn't really matter. I can give some tips on how to do it, but it doesn't matter too much what you write. It's more that you just do it every single day, and then you'll develop your own style as you go. But the reason to do it is you get to see your own thoughts on paper. And every single client I've ever worked with is overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed either all the time or at some point. And it's because all these ideas, all these things they need to get done are swimming around their head. And that stresses them out, that overwhelms them, and it freezes them up, or it scares them. It creates fear because it's this bundled mess, jumbled mess of all this thing that needs to get done. So if you actually just take the time to write for 5 minutes about your day or about what you'd like to get done, either end of the day, you can free yourself of that burden significantly. There's a story about this guy who every day at the end of his work, he's a CEO and he runs a multi-million-dollar business. At the end of his day, he walks out the building door and walks up to a light post, and he talks to the light post for 5 minutes, and it changes his life because he can just dump stuff out and let it go. And your journal is much like that light post. You can just dump it out and let things go and free your mind of those burdens, and then be able to look at it much more from an objective standpoint. So that's first thing I would suggest to create more self-awareness.
So interesting. We have a researcher, Paul, who helps with, getting all the details of, our guests. One of the things that he pulled that I thought was so interesting, there was a predictive index, which, does some profiling for hiring. 99% of employees say it's important to have a boss that is self-aware. And I thought that was super interesting because I was wondering who the 0.1% was that didn't think it was important to have a boss that's self-aware. Right. And so
Right.
why is self-awareness so important, and why is it part of the framework?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm interacting with my employees and I don't realize the impact that I'm having on them and that my communication isn't getting through like I'd like it to be, they're not going to be able to perform at the level that I want them to, and they're not going to be able to perform, period, at the level that they can get to, because I don't realize the impact I'm having on them. I have a client that says, this person said this or that person said that, and it pisses me off. He consistently says the words, it pisses me off. And I confronted him the other day. I said, hey, you gotta consider what those words mean to other people and the impact that they're going to have. And so if we're not aware of our communication, then that makes a big impact on people in a negative way. If we're not aware of the way we project ourselves with our body language, with our tone of voice, that's going to make a big impact. If we're not aware of our own expectations of other people and whether those are fair or not fair, we may put on someone this expectation that's unrealistic, or we may put on someone this expectation that is too low. And if we're not aware of what we're doing in that, it's going to hinder our leadership, and obviously it's going to hinder them as well. So those are a couple of things.
I love that. You're right. I think about the whole notion of people not being self-aware, not how they're showing up, and how that might negatively impact or not allow people to flourish in whatever their unique gifts are, in doing that. And I think it was really interesting. We had Steve Anderson on a couple of weeks ago who wrote the Bezos letters, and it was all the lessons from Jeff Bezos shareholder letters. And one of them was that people aren't afraid to fail, but they're afraid of the consequences of failing, right? And that's that awareness of the leader of how they're showing up. And so we tell people, take chances, take risks, foster innovation, all of these things, except when it doesn't work out, and then I'm going to kick the crap out of you. And so I just find that to be really interesting, because that's not the behavior that we want. And yet, as a leader, that's the behavior that we end up fostering, which is oppressing, that development and that risk taking that all great companies should be doing. It should be tactical. It should be, calculated, but risk taking should be a part of it. And it's a place that I find where leaders who are not self-aware really, really miss the mark in unlocking that potential for their people. So
yeah, and I think part of that lack of self-awareness is a lack of observation. A lot of people that aren't that self-aware don't observe what's going on around them, not only observing themselves, but just paying attention to what's going on around them, the marketplace, the impact that they're having on people, the impact people are having on them. And if you don't observe what's going on around you, then it's gonna be very damaging. And in the book, I talk about that idea of being willing to allow your people to take risk and trusting them with that. And that is a huge piece of empowering people. You got to let them mess up, because if you don't let them mess up, then they can't learn from their mistakes, and they can't get to that next level in their own thinking and being able to innovate. So risk is necessary to be able to engage your subconscious mind, to be able to engage your brain at the next level.
I think you're right. Let's talk about accountability, though, right? Because it's one thing to allow people to be empowered, to take some risks, to be aware of how I'm showing up for my people. But, I believe so much in the power of accountability, creating cultures of accountability. As I always say, it makes good companies great and great companies unstoppable. And I talked about this in episode 18 about how to do this in my framework. I always think about like crazy statistics in this. And so there was a landmark workplace accountability study where 85% of people didn't realize what the company's goals were. It's like, how can I possibly be accountable for something that I don't know exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve? And it's like such this fundamental thing of communicating with everyone, hey, here's what we're going after as a company. So therefore, you have to line your actions for it. Tell me about, in your framework, what is the role of accountability? Why is it so important for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different sides of the coin of accountability. To me, there's the accountability that has to do with holding others accountable, and then there's the accountability that has to do with holding yourself accountable. So I primarily focus on that one in my book because that's the one we have the most control over, really. And something that I realized many years ago is that I'm pretty good at keeping myself accountable, and I was like, why is that? What's going on? What has happened? So I reverse engineered the process, and what it ended up becoming is a acronym, because I love acronyms. They help me remember things, and it's what I call the accountability PASS, PASS. And the first part of it is passive accountability, and it's the idea that when you are excited about something, who has a goal or a dream that they really are trying to achieve, let's say next year, that they wouldn't mind sharing with everybody? So I can use you as an example.
Someone's got to have one. Dawn, come on off.
Well, we're re-releasing my first 3 books into 4, plus another 5 new solo books next year and 2 co-author books.
Okay, awesome. Why do you want to do that?
Okay, well, the first 3 books that we're releasing into 4 books is because after all these years, I still cannot believe we are still having the same conversations that I wrote about all those years ago. Plus, with the feedback that I got from readers and the way in which my writing has developed over the last decade, it was time to revisit what we'd written to improve upon that and answer some of the questions that readers had sent to me. Plus, when you turn 3 books into 4, you can then split them into 2 duologies, increase the number of products that you've got on offer, and increase your revenue.
Nice. So the reason that we want to know the why, and there's probably even deeper why that we could go into, but it would take...
it's not the space for that.
Yeah, right. So when you get to that really deep why, so that already is some really good stuff. But when you get to that really deep why for yourself, you're like, why did I write this book? Well, I wrote my book because I want to help change the lives of thousands of people. And the way to do that, for me, my approach is, if I can impact business owners and their leadership, then they can impact thousands, if not millions of people in the way that they're leading them, right? So that's the reason behind my book. So when I tell someone that story, my book becomes far more interesting than it's a framework for leadership. Like, okay, who cares? There's millions of frameworks for leadership.
Yeah.
So I tell them a real heart, a real meaning behind it, people care. And then I care more deeply too. Same thing with you, Dawn, and everybody else in here has goals. When you get to that real meaningful story, you care more, and so do other people. And then as you tell more and more people, some of them will reach out to you and say, hey, what's going on with that book that you want to write? Or what's going on with those books that you're going to republish or rewrite? And then that keeps you accountable to staying on top of what it is that you said you were going to do. It forces you to have integrity in that. You still are the one that has to do the work, but they're like a check engine light in your vehicle, right? It pops on, and sometimes we don't do anything about it. But if someone's sitting shotgun all the time and saying, hey, there's a check engine light on, you need to do something about it, then you probably eventually are going to do something about it. And when you don't, your engine blows up like mine does. So make sure you check that check engine light. Dead serious. Mine actually blew up. But anyway, when you do that, it makes people follow up with you because they start to care about your story. And then what you do, the A in that, so that's your passive accountability. You tell your story and you make it really compelling for yourself and other people. And then your brain says, I'm here right now, but you've created this beautiful story of what could be. Now your brain has to fix that gap. And so your brain is passively all the time trying to fix that gap. So the more clearly you can write out that story as a compelling story, as if you're writing it to a 12-year-old, let's say, and creating the visuals of it, the way it feels, the way it sounds, then your brain has to make that happen. And it doesn't know the difference between what is and what you've created. So that's passive. Active accountability then is, of those 50 people you've told, maybe 2 or 3 reach out to you and ask you about what's going on. Then you grab one of them and say, hey, Carol, let's have a conversation about keeping each other accountable to the goals that you have for 2023. And let's meet about it every other week or every week and talk about it over a 30-minute phone call or Zoom or in person. And that creates this really strong accountability to making sure that you follow through on what you say you're going to follow through on. And in leadership, we need that desperately, because when you're the top dog or whatever, it's really difficult to have other people to turn to. So when you can find somebody around you that's a friend that already cares about what you're doing, it makes a big difference. And then the first S is structures. So who here uses a digital to-do list? Raise your hand if you use a digital to-do list, right? A lot of people. So some people, it looks like. I can't see everybody. When you use a digital to-do list, it creates this opportunity for you to put recurring tasks in there. And often when it comes to accomplishing things and staying accountable, it's the recurring things we need to be accountable to. So the digital to-do list helps you with that. And then the second structure, there's all kinds of them, but these are the two primary ones. The second one is a calendar. Just use a calendar, right? So then the calendar is all your meetings with people, right? So if the to-do list is the things, then your calendar is the people. And then lastly, it's self-accountability, which is the idea of, has anybody jumped out of an airplane in this group? Raise your hand if you've jumped out of an airplane. Jerry has. Okay. So when it
By the
comes
way, it's hold on, just a quick aside.
oh yeah,
It is one of the most counterintuitive things to scoot your rear end to the edge of a plane that is perfectly fine and to jump out of it and to think, I'm going to pull this thing and a parachute is going to save my life. So that was one of those like mind juxtapositions, trying to get yourself to like scooch, 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 which is why they tell you, all right, we're going to go on 3, and they go 1, 2, and push you out on 2.
Yeah, well, and that's the level of commitment we need, though, right? Because if you're in that airplane, you can scoot your butt to the very edge and then go, nope, I'm not going to do it, and scoot back. Because as soon as you lose gravity, it's over. You can't get back into that plane. It's the same thing when we commit to things, and when we are leading and we want to improve in our leadership. We need to find whatever it is that will make us go to that point of no return. For me recently, it was I had my wife quit her job. She was a nurse, paying really well. She had been doing it for 15 years. And we said, you know what? You don't need to work anymore. You can just quit and you can work with me. And she did. That's a point of no return for me and for her in my business. There's just, it's over. She's not going to do nurse anymore. She was kind of tired of it anyway. So whatever that is for you for 2023 or for right now, figure that out, and that'll help you to stay accountable, because there's no looking back at that point. You can't get back in the plane. So that's your accountability pass. Passive, tell your compelling story to yourself and as many people as possible. Active, get one person on board to meet with them consistently to talk about your goals. Structures, use that to-do list and use your calendar. And finally, find that point of no return. Whatever that is for you, figure it out and commit to it.
I love that. Pass. Never heard it explained that way, Kyle. I think that's a unique approach, but the whole notion of like, jumping out of the plane, I've heard burn the boats before. There is no going back to the boats. You burn the boat, you go to the land, and that's just the way it is. I know, Don, when I heard that too, I was, no, I'm not going to burn the boats. I love boats. So that's a great like sub framework in there, really tactical things that you can do. What happens when people just aren't being accountable to themselves, right? They say they want one thing, and yet all of their actions line up to doing something else. And I see this happen all the time. And I ask people, is that truly something that you want to see happen? Because I'm not seeing the activities that are going to get you to the end goals that are happening. What's that conversation look like if you're the accountability partner?
Yeah, I'm doing a mastermind with a construction company right now on growth. And at the end of the conversation, we were talking about fear and how fear gets in the way. And probably most of us know that fear stands for false events appearing real. And what happens is often the things that we are afraid of, or the things that prevent us from staying accountable, in other words, not following through, not doing what we say we're going to do, there's fear of failure, there's fear of we're not going to be able to handle it, fear of overwhelm, all kinds of different fears. But to me, the solution is a compelling story. If your why is more compelling than your fear, your why will always win ultimately. Now, your fears might one day beat you up a little bit and you don't take the actions you want to. But if that story is compelling enough, your fears are going to lose way more often, and you're going to make the progress that you need to make and want to make. So I strongly urge people to get into that deeper, compelling story. And we know Simon Sinek talks about the why, and that's kind of what I'm referring to here. But write it down very clearly as if it already has happened. Don't just think about what it could be. Write it down as if it exists already in your life. And like I said before, your brain doesn't know the difference between what exists for real and what you're creating in your imagination, especially when you can really leverage a powerful imagination. And we all have that powerful imagination. Do that, and you're going to be able to overcome those fears, which is what prevents us from following through on things or makes us procrastinate. among a lot of other things fear does to us, unfortunately.
And I think that's why when I look at companies, when I look at the foundation of every great company, it's vision, values, and resources, right? So what's the mission we're on? How are we treating each other? And how many mistakes can we make before we go out of business? That's the resources piece. And so, when you're in your mindset of, well, this is where I'm going, and it's an imperative, and you're so committed to the why, it's much easier to be gritty and resilient. Whereas if you're not committed to it, you haven't articulated, then it's easy to give up. Like, well, I'm going to sleep in today. I'm not going to go work out. I'm going to have that cheesesteak instead of the salad that I know because I'm trying to lose weight and I'm making good food decisions. And I think that's so important. People underestimate or consider it soft, the idea of vision and values. And I would tell you, it is not soft. It is the foundational element of every business, every great business, if you really want to have a compelling business. And so I love that whole notion of like connecting the why to be accountable for it. And that's my experience that, it's way easier to be gritty and resilient because it's an imperative. I have to go do this. And I've articulated to people that I'm going to go do this. It's like this, right? I'm on a mission, 5 million people in the next 5 years. It's an imperative for me. I'm working harder than I ever have in my life because my skills don't match my ambition. So I got a lot of work to do. And I'm up to the challenge. So it'll be fun.
I want to say something about that real quick before we move on. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about goals, and the host said something. So I can't take credit for this, but the host said something that's really stuck with me. And so I share it with other people. And it was, you're not going to accomplish your goals, or it's going to be very difficult to accomplish your goals if you don't have a relationship with them. And then I started thinking about that. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, relationship with someone would be, you see them a lot. You interact with them a lot. You communicate with them. You make adjustments as you communicate. Well, it's the same thing with our goals. And you have that one up in your corner there. You have a relationship with that goal. It's around you. You see it all the time. You talk about it all the time. When you really care about someone, you talk about them. You spend time with them. So we should do the same thing with our goals. And if we're not, then it's going to be way less likely that we're going to be moving forward on our goals every single day. So that could be putting on your steering wheel. That could be putting on your phone as the thing that pops up when you open your phone. All kinds of ways you can do it, but make sure you have a relationship with your goals. And that'll
all I can think of as you're saying this is, I'm going to get a pillow made with that saying on it, and I'm going to hug it every single night so I can have a really good tight relationship with it. I'm okay with that.
What's funny is when you did that, I saw you like when the day didn't go well that you're sucking your thumb while you're hugging it. Please pillow comfort me.
Okay, we have good days of bad. It is an interesting point because I don't know. I'm probably on 25 hours of calls a week, and so this thing shows up every single call, and just it scares me, right? But it's there. It's there every single day. It has been there almost for a year now, and there is no escaping that thing right there. It's chasing me in my dreams. Eventually I'm going to chase it. So it'll be good. Talk to me about growth, the G here, because I love the work of Carolyn Dweck, the growth mindset. For those of you who don't know it, I'd love for Kyle to give us just a little crash course on the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset and why this is important.
Sure. Yeah. So, simply a fixed mindset is when you get a 70 on a math test in school. If you're ever the student that did that, that was me. Then you think, well, I guess I'll never be good at math. With someone that has a growth mindset, they get a 70 and they're going, well, that sucks, but I know I can do better. I can learn to get better at this. I can learn to improve at this particular test or this particular skill. And that's fundamentally, that's the difference between the two. When you mess something up, you're like, well, I'll never get better at this, versus, oh, I messed this up, I can learn from this. And I break that down into some habits and mindsets in the book. And what I talk about when it comes to growth is I call it a growth SUV. And if you think about, as a leader, we have this growth SUV, and SUVs are 4-wheel drive, right? They can drive on the snow, they can drive through mud, they can go over mountains, they can do a lot of things, or they can just cruise on the freeway. Either way, anyway, they can make it through. And so we need a growth SUV because crap happens and we're going to have to deal with it. And there's a bunch of different contexts we have to deal with it. But there's people that sit, or there's mindsets that sit in that growth SUV with you. And one of them is the risk mindset. It sits in the back seat. And it makes sure to encourage you to take some risks, that it's okay to take some risks. It's okay to screw up, make some mistakes. And then next to the risk mindset, you have a learner mindset, because as you take risks, you learn from it. So those two are sitting in the back, along with the, let's see, what's the other one in the back seat? Pardon me for a moment. I have to think about this. The persistent mindset is sitting in the back seat with those three. So you got risk, learning, and persistence. You take risk, you mess up, you learn from it, and then you persist to continue to grow and learn in that. But in the midst of all that, someone has to be navigating and driving, right? Some mindset has to be navigating and driving. Well, the navigator is the sales mindset, because we need to be consistently selling our own goals to ourselves and to other people, our own ideas, our mission, our vision, our values. That needs to be sold all the time. And it helps us to navigate, to make it to where we're trying to go. But sales sometimes fail. And if that's what's driving you, your growth SUV is going to stop if that's what's driving you. So then the mindset that drives us, the one that sits in the driver's seat, is abundance. You have to have an abundance mindset. It says, we screwed up, this didn't work out, or this did work out, there's more potential. And so those 5 mindsets come together to create your growth SUV, to move you forward to a growth mindset and keep you and your business going forward. And obviously there's all kinds of nuances to all 5 of them, but I like to call it the growth SUV. And you need the backseat drivers, and you need your navigator, and you need that abundance sitting in the driver's seat as well. So
I'm trying to figure out which one would my wife would be, because she is a tremendous front seat driver. I don't know, abundance. I call it BO, Barnes Optimism. Who knows? I love that. So, I'm just thinking about this because I'm trying to think of like what vehicle I would be in an SUV, right? So risk mindset, it's okay. Got to learn from our mistakes, got to continue to be persistent. Sales, which I love sales, right? It's the whole thing of like continuing to talk about the vision, the values, the places that we're going, and then the abundance. Because I don't know about y'all, but I get the opportunity to work with really high achievers. And what I find is the difference between low achievers and high achievers in that space is the ability to take action, one. And the difference between my high achievers and my highest achievers are the ability to maintain a positive mindset. It's not that bad things don't happen. It's that the ability to get back to center and to stop the negative self-talk is just, it happens easier for them. They're able to get back to center, to take action, and to get back down the path of success. So I love that analogy. You have some really good ones. The pass is really good. The SUV is really good. How does someone transition from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? Is it just being mindful and adopting that SUV, or are there other things that you think about that get people out of, I'm not good at math, which is a great one because I'm not good at technology, I'm not good at math. Well, I mean, other people can get good at it. You have to be a craftsman and work at it to be good at it. So what does that look like for you?
yeah, I think you got to go back to accountability. There's 5 habits that I talk about in the book when it comes to growth that are definitely helpful, that move you through growth. But if you have a fixed mindset, then you're not going to be able to deploy these growth habits. So you got to go back to accountability instead. And yes, we talked about the past, but there's a 5th habit, and that's the advisory habit. And what I'm talking about there is what I call a personal board of advisors. And I don't know if any of you, how many of you have a professional board? Raise your hand if you have a professional board, people that you sit around a table with them and talk about your business or nonprofit board that you're on. Right? I'm on a board personally as well. Right. So maybe a couple of us. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a personal advisory board. And the beauty of this board is the people that are on it don't need to know. And the people, when you kick them off, they don't need to know either. Right. What this board is, it's full of roughly 5 to 7 people that you want to go to consistently for advice. So who are those people? Well, I recommend at least one dead person on your board. And what I mean by that is maybe there's someone in the history that you care about that set an example that matters to you. Read about them, study them, watch videos about them, watch shows about them, and you're going to learn from them. They're going to be advising you. And then 2 or 3 people that you know personally that you can interact with, that can advise you and can encourage you. And you call them up, or you meet with for coffee with them. You ask for their input, ask for their advice. And there's no set consistency to this. Like the active accountability is set and it's consistent. It's weekly or biweekly. This is just, you ring them up on the phone, you send them an email, but there's 2 to 3 people that you're consistently doing that with. And then there's 2 other people that you're reaching out to. They're a bit of a stretch. They're people that you don't know, and they're kind of scary to contact. There's someone that you're like, well, I don't know if that person would give me advice. Would they? Who cares? Reach out to them and seek them out, and they maybe will give you some advice. And if they don't, who cares? Find somebody else. They don't need to know they're on your board. Just kick them off. They're jerks. Who cares? Move on. The reason that you want to do that is those people set an example for you. And if your mindset is a little bit fixed in a particular area, none of us are fixed in every area, and none of us are growth in every area. So we'll notice where we're fixed and we'll notice where we're growing. But when we're meeting with those advisory board members, having conversations, they'll inspire us and they'll push us because they're at this different level, and that helps us grow. That helps us. I use something called a calibration habit, and that's what you're doing. You're calibrating yourself to these other leaders. You're not comparing, but you're calibrating, and that can make a huge difference in helping you to shift gears and go, wait, no, I can grow. I can get to that stage. I can move that way. I can be that prolific of a writer or a speaker or a leader. And without that board, it's a lot harder to do that.
I love that. I have a whole different concept on a personal board of directors, but I think yours is fantastic. And, growing up, I grew up like most Americans with a dysfunctional household. And so my parents were not vice chair 1 and vice chair 2. And so I had to invite people like Confucius and Lao Tzu and Martin Luther King onto my board. Amazingly, they all accepted on my first invite. And so I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, there's so much to learn from so many people. And when you are humble enough, you can stay in that mindset of just learn, grow. I love this. Kyle, you're crushing it. There's been so many like good truth bombs and ways in which to think a little bit differently. So if anyone has any questions, I think Maria put it in there, but you guys can put them in the chat. If you want to come on, you can ask them. Love to do that. Walk me through how the last one, right? One of the things that, when I think about what leadership is and how leaders really get in their own way, I think the real core of a leader is to create predictable environments where employees can make autonomous, engaged, empowered, agile decisions that align with the company's goals. Right? That's what we do, right?
Nice.
And I even have this whole concept of like leadership quicksand. When does leadership go wrong? Well, when we have a lack of clarity, clarity leads to confusion leads to frustration leads to a break in trust leads to poor relationships. Next thing you know, nothing is getting done inside the building, and people are going like, God, I have the bad news bears as a team. It's like, it's not them, it's you. You have done a bad job of creating clarity for your team of how to win. And so how do you go about creating that engagement, that empowerment? Because one of the things that I have found is it's really hard for some leaders to relinquish their role, their task, their positional authority, even when their people are ready to take it on.
Yeah.
How do we go about and do that? How do we help leaders forward on this one?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I could talk about here. So I'm gonna pick 2 to talk about. Maybe we talk about a third, but people are fascinating. And if a leader can approach their team with that idea that everyone on their team is brilliant and absolutely fascinating, they're going to be able to empower their team at such a different level. If a leader, when you think about your team members, when you think about your friends, you think about your family, and you don't find them to be absolutely fascinating, that's okay. Just start to think that way, and you'll find that they are, because everyone has these amazing stories. Even if the story is mundane, they had a pretty normal life, they still have amazing stories. They still have fascinating insights about what they've experienced in life. And then you have the extreme sides where people have gone through a lot of crap. Their lives are fascinating. They've learned so much from that. So I always encourage my clients to start from that perspective when it comes to their employees. Your employees are absolutely fascinating, and they're not stupid, because you didn't hire stupid people. So why do you treat them like they're stupid by telling them what to do all the time, which is the second part? Because that's what I found with when I first start working with some of my clients. They're acting like the employees they've hired are stupid, that they don't know what they're doing. And so the employee comes to with them with a problem, they tell them what to do, or they tell them exactly what to do and they micromanage them. That's basically telling the people that you've hired, you're not fascinating and you're stupid. So I'm gonna tell you exactly what to do and when to do it and how to do it. That's not fun for the employee, and that's very disempowering for them. And that does not create longevity for your workforce, that people are going to be cycling through that door. So how do you overcome that? You ask questions. That's as simple as it is. You ask open-ended questions. Someone brings you a problem and you ask them a question. I was working with a client, probably a month and a half ago. And we were talking about this, how she's always solving her employees' problems, and it frustrates her that they bring her all these problems and then she tells them what to do and then they don't do it right. And I said, I'll call her Susie. I said, Susie, maybe instead of solving the problem, you can ask them a question. She's like, what? It was like shocking to her that I would suggest that. And she said, well, what do I ask? And I said, simply just ask, what do you think? 4 words, powerful question, changes everything. What do you think? Someone brings you a problem and you ask them, what do you think? Because you want to employ the unconscious mind of your employees, not the conscious mind. If you're engaging their unconscious mind, now you have a workforce that's truly empowered. If all you're doing is engaging the conscious mind of your workforce is bored and they're probably going to leave within a year. But if you're engaging their unconscious mind and helping them to really dig deeply and think deeply about problems, now you have a very empowered workforce that's solving what I love to solve for my clients, which is future problems. Because the present problems are not that big a deal. It's when your workforce is solving future problems by engaging their unconscious mind when they're at work and not at work. Now everyone is winning and everyone's happy. So, but the best way to get to that in the workplace is by asking open-ended questions.
Love that, because I've coined the term. I don't know if I've coined it. I've started saying it.
We'll give you credit.
Maybe someone else did. I don't know. But, we have shiny object syndrome, which entrepreneurs are great at thinking about, right? We're going to chase the squirrel. And then, what I've termed is the swooping in syndrome, which is to say, as the leader, if I'm constantly swooping down onto my people and solving their problems for them, I am truly disempowering them.
Yeah.
And while that may feel good on my ego and the firefighting of like, well, I took care of that one, ultimately, all you're doing is creating a relationship of codependence. They will wait for you to come solve their problems. And therefore, you can never elevate because therefore, they are not stepping into it. And, Carol Ann Sharp says the same thing. It's the same with kids. If we do things for them on a constant basis, it doesn't work over the long term. It may feel good in the short term, but what success are you setting them up for when they go to college and they have to go make their own decisions, or they're in front of clients and they have to make decisions on behalf of the company? Ultimately, it doesn't work. And so, resisting that temptation and that urge of doing the swooping in that feeds your own soul, that feeds your own ego, but ultimately is destructive to the business, has to absolutely be priority number 1 for any leader who's looking to not only level themselves up, but for all of their people. Because that's the only way that you can continue to progress, is if you are leveling the people up below you to take care of the problems that you're dealing with, so you can take care of bigger or more complex or more scale in the decisions that you're needing to make. So I think that's super important. One of the other pieces that you talked about here, which is, the whole notion that people are fascinating. And I make this distinction and a challenge to companies. A lot of times, the only way that we see progress or promotion inside companies is to people leadership. And there are plenty of people who want to be individual contributors, can be amazing individual contributors, have no interest. They don't think people are fascinating. They're a hindrance to them. Like, get them out of my way. I just want to go be the amazing business development superstar. I just want to be the amazing coder. I just want to be the amazing whatever. And we set people up into these traps where we take individual contributors who are great at doing the doing, and we ask them to lead people. Any insights for you on, because that ends up to be a train wreck. train wreck for the people who are in their care. It ends up being a train wreck for the person that we've promoted. We've taken them out of their unique ability of doing the doing, and now they're in leading people, which is completely different skill sets. Anything that you've seen how we like do that differently, Kyle?
I think I need to hear the question differently.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the question myself, but I just look and see businesses consistently put people in situations that they can't be successful.
Oh, okay.
And that the only path is to people leadership. And that I think you have to have a parallel path to individual contributor, and that's okay, right? We can have rock stars and we can have superstars, as Google terms it, right? People who manage people, those are the superstars, and the rock stars are the individual contributors. There's space and path for all of them. I don't know that there's a question in that. It's just one of the things that I see that happens a lot.
Sure. Well, there kind of is a little bit of a built-in question. How do you make sure that those that have a difficult time paying attention to other people and caring about other people have at least some skill in that arena, have some ability to care about if they're the rock star, but they still actually care about the people that they work with, and they're not just ignoring them. There's a rule that I learned, and I call it a habit in the book, but there's a rule that I learned when I was studying DISC. Who here is familiar with DISC, DISC? You guys, anybody familiar? So I love DISC. I'm certified in it, and it was how I got started in my business. Ultimately, there's a story behind that, but it's how I got started. And one of the rules is to treat people the way to treat people the way they want to be treated. It's called the platinum rule. And how do you do that? Well, you have to know them. You have to know them. And so what I put in the book is what I call the study habit, which is if you're a leader, you should be studying your people. And the way that you can do that without being creepy is to have them take a DISC assessment, or have them take an Enneagram, or whatever different kinds of assessments are out there. It doesn't really matter. But even for those people that are the rock stars, how you termed it, Jerry, if you have them take an assessment, they learn about themselves, but then they also learn about the types of other people, and that can make a big difference. I've come into organizations and brought that in and helped teams that were basically a complete disaster, fighting all this confusion. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, well, this person cares about the details and I don't. Okay, I can give them more details. And that's the single shift that was made, and it makes all the difference. I had, at the very beginning of my business, I did an assessment with this lady. We broke down the results, and it turns out that she was an SC, steady, conscientious type. And she did events for a local casino out here. And she started working with Google. She started talking to one of the people at Google, and they were going to do an event for Google. And this casino out here was in competition with a lot of other places to host the event. It was going to be a $500,000 event. So huge win if she could win this thing, and she gets a decent commission too. So wow. Right. So we have a conversation about this, and she learns the different personality types, and she studies this person. That's the person she's communicating with, phone and email. She's studying and figures out that he's a dominant type. And so she treats him the way he wants to be treated, and is really assertive with him and direct with him, and all about the return on investment, all that stuff. And she wins the contract. And afterward, he tells her, I gave you the contract because you actually treated me. You actually understood me. And that's what we need to do with our people, is study them. And the rewards are enormous, just like the rewards for her was enormous. The reward for us as leaders when we study our people is going to be and of course for them, it's going to be very large too.
Wow.
So whether or not that answered a question, I'm not sure. But when it comes to empowering people, study your people, of course. We all know this too.
Listen, what I have learned after 9 months of doing this, or 10 months of doing this, I am superfluous to the show. I mean, we just bring smart people in and let them talk. And they're the ones that are creating the insights and answering their own questions, which is the best part of all of this. And so I appreciate you hopping in to make sense of the nonsense that I was giving you to answer. Walk me through, as we close this out, because we're running into the hour mark, which we try and keep it to an hour. Walk me through, in your experience, which is the hardest for leaders to master or to adopt as you think about your framework? What is it that you see there?
Yeah, I think internally it's self-awareness versus accountability or growth. That's internally. Externally, it's empowering other people. But the heart is accountability. That's the hardest one for people to master. Yes, it's just so much, it's a lot more of a softer skill. they're all soft skills, but I think accountability is the softest of them all, because it's this very scary thing to hold other people accountable. And it's this very scary thing to hold yourself accountable. And when you don't, what are you supposed to do with that? Do you beat yourself up because you didn't follow through, because you came out of integrity with yourself? So I've found that my greatest value to my clients is helping them to learn how to build their own accountability paths, how to create their own high level of accountability for themselves, so that at the end of a call, we've created a plan that says, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and then they actually do it. That is really empowering for them. So to me, if I can nail down accountability with my client and help them get to a way better place there, the rest of it's probably going to fall into place a lot easier. But if we don't get at the heart of accountability, because it is the nails that holds the leadership house together, the house is going to crumble. I don't care how much of a growth mindset or how well you empower, it's going to crumble. So
I think you're right. Every organization that I know is looking to build more accountability. And, another stat that Paul had pulled for me is 82% of participants surveyed say they either try to hold people accountable but fail, or they avoid it altogether. 82% of people basically are like, sorry, didn't work. Good luck.
I track with that with my experience with clients.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's why senior leaders are constantly like, we need to build more accountable, like, organization, more culture. And it's because I think people are scared to do it. And, as I say to people, you're not calling people out, you're calling people up. This is the commitment we made to each other. And so therefore, we're all elevating. And right, it's not personal. It's just because we made a commitment and we're on this path to winning together. That's what it's all about.
Right. And as a leader, you have to set that example too. Be the one that's the most accountable of anybody. I think the other problem, and I know we're on the nose of the time here, but the other problem is there's no, it's difficult to find a process to hold other people accountable. But there's a book, I didn't write it, but there's a book that I highly recommend. So I wanted to recommend it to everybody. It's called Crucial Accountability, by the same people that wrote Crucial Conversations. That is hands down the best accountability book I've ever read, that walks you through how to do it. And if we had 5 more minutes, I would teach it right now, but we don't. But it's just like phenomenal. Highly recommend you read it. It's the external side of accountability, not the internal. It's the external side of it. And it is rock on.
I love it. The one that I love and the one that I go to, since we're giving book recommendations, is Winning with Accountability. And it's a simple framework. It's the one that I teach and use. And giving people the tools to be successful is everything. And that's why we come together. And I'm grateful for you to share your wisdom. How do people find you if they want to learn more about the great Kyle Gillette?
Well, I don't know how great I am, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Kyle Gillette, obviously. And then sagemindset.com is my website. And those are probably the two best places. I'm on TikTok as well as leadership Sage. You can find me there. But if you want to connect directly, email is the best way, so we can schedule a phone call. That's the best way, so we can schedule a virtual coffee.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. Listen, everyone, I am literally on this mission. And what I have learned in the last year is that I need your help, and I need to ask for help better, because usually I'm the helper in all of this. So if you can help me, like, subscribe, leave a review. You're here, or if you're listening, I'm asking for your help. So think of someone who might benefit from being here, from listening about the lessons. If you can share the show, spread the message, we will be well on our way within the next 4 years, because we're closing out year 1 of this mission, to positively impacting 5 million people over the next 5 years. So I'm grateful for all of you. Next week, we have a really good guest. Zoom was down the last time we tried to have this guest. That's how hot this topic was. But Dr. Ed Slover, who's both a professor and a practitioner, I've now known Ed probably about 2 months. He is one of the great thought leaders. I mean, he pings me with articles via text message, sends me a voice note. We've been on a couple calls, and he is just a really, really smart guy, master's, doctorate. I mean, this guy is next level thinking. And so next week, I'm super excited to have him on the show. I'm not really sure where we're going to go with the conversation. I think there's so many different ways we can go, but I know we're going to talk about leadership and communication and the currency of relationships, which is really conversations. And I think that's super interesting. So I hope you'll join us next week. I think he's going to be a super interesting guest. Kyle, I hope he's as interesting and entertaining as you have been. So I am grateful for you. And everyone, we will see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you for coming in and spending some time with us.
Thank you.